What's up? How are we this Super Bowl Sunday? Oh, okay. All right. Thought it'd be a little more excited. That's fine. Hey, today I get to join those fine people I got to interview, and as a suffering fan, and I wore my New York Giants jersey. And they have consistently let me down. Now, granted, I've seen 2 Super Bowls in my lifetime, which is more than the Jags could say, no offense. But they have ruined many a Sunday afternoon for me. I don't know about you. And I don't know if they brought me to literal tears, but it's been close, and I'm ashamed to say that a little bit. But hey, the beauty of them letting me down in like October and me going, yeah, this team's trash, no hopes at a Super Bowl, is tonight I get to sit back, relax, watch the game with some snacks and just hope for some touchdowns and a funny commercial, while John paces his living room stressed out because his team's actually good, and he has to worry about, will his Super Bowl Sunday be ruined, you know, will they show Travis Kelce crying on Taylor Swift's shoulder, you know, like these kind of things he has to worry about, and I don't have to worry. I'm just going to sit back and relax and enjoy the snacks and commercials. So being a fan is weird. Fandom is weird, but while that brings lots of suffering, no matter who you like or what sport you like, I don't think it quite compares to the suffering and the waves we're talking about in the book of Job. We're in week 2 of our series, Kiss the Wave, working our way through this book of Job, and the book of Job is something. Okay, I don't know about you, it's something. It's tough, honestly, and it's difficult, and it's a hard read when you really read it. It's not quite what you thought it was, what you heard about it. It's different, it's difficult. But here's the thing, though it may be difficult, I think, and we as a church believe, there is so much good in wrestling with the difficult parts of the Bible. We don't want to gloss over everything. We think that there is so much growth in these parts of the Bible, even if the answers aren't super crystal clear at the end, or even if the answer isn't really what we hoped it'd be in the first place. The book of Job is not as easy as some story we learned in Sunday school. I grew up learning this story. I grew up in church, and to me growing up, it was a story of this dude who had a ton of stuff. He was a good dude. He lost it all. He trusted God, and God said, yay, Job, here's double everything you had before. And we're like, yay, what a story. What a story of the justness and the goodness of God. It's so awesome. But it's not that simple. If you read it, you learned it's really the story of this deep, deep suffering and confusion. Turns out there aren't 4 chapters in Job. I learned 1, 2, and 42. There's actually 42 total chapters in this book, and there is a ton of wrestling and arguing done by Job and his friends over what is going on and why is this happening. And this morning we want to focus on a certain part of the story that is this crazy heavenly scene that we get a glimpse into, a part of the story that our main character Job has no idea ever happened or was happening in the background. And I want to take a few minutes this morning and I want to walk through that scene in the book of Job a little bit because of what happens because of this specific scene. In Job 1, as we get started, we get introduced to this guy Job. He lives in this land of Uz. He's, the Bible says, a complete man, a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 10 kids, which is a lot of kids, and a bunch of animals, okay? Basically, this dude was loaded. Richest dude around, probably. Also, not just rich, but just a good guy, the greatest man in the land, the best of the best. And then right after we see that in the first chapter of Job, we get transported to this totally different place. In Job 1, verse 6, it starts like this. One day, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. See how quickly that changed? We meet a guy, and then we're just in this totally different place. We went from physical place to this spiritual, heavenly place. Because, I don't know if you realize this, if you read the Bible, we live in a spiritual world. And there are things beyond what we can see and touch and smell. And maybe you were here way back when we went through Ephesians 6 and we did this series called Battle Ready, and we talked about spiritual warfare. And we read that Paul reminds us that, hey, our battle isn't against flesh and blood. It's not a physical thing with swords and shields. It's a spiritual, unseen one. And it's always happening behind us. Yet, even though we don't see it, it impacts us and it changes things. We see this all over the Bible. And here in Job, the curtain for us as the reader is lifted for just a moment. We get a glimpse at what is happening behind the scenes in this spiritual world. And here's the thing about Job. We, the reader, get to see it. Job never did. Job had no idea this was happening. So what is this heavenly place? Well, to be honest, I'm not really 100% sure, okay? You thought I had to be up here with all the answers. John gave me the hard week. I don't have all the answers. I'm sorry to disappoint. But it appears that in this scene, we see God sitting on his rightful throne. And the sons of God, or like angels, are standing before God giving a report. And it seems this is a meeting where God runs the world from his rightful place of authority. But then someone very specific steps forward. The word Satan actually means like accuser. It's almost a title. He's like the prosecutor in this court of law. And in this meeting where angels are reporting to God who's running the world, Satan is the one who's going to step forward and argue that God isn't running the world correctly. Verse 7, the Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" "From roaming through the earth," Satan answered in, "and walking around it." Okay, so in this glimpse of the heavenly realm, as Paul calls it in the New Testament, we actually get to see Satan and learn what he's up to. He roams the earth. He searches and disrupts and does whatever he can to cause whatever damage he can. That's like in 1 Peter, we learn, Peter writes that the devil is a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He's roaming around. And then Satan and God keep talking. Verse 8, then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil." What a report God has about Job. So God goes, oh, hey, while you're roaming, while you're looking and searching for what to destroy and what you can attack, did you notice my man Job? And I don't know, it's probably a good thing Job wasn't there, because if I'm Job, I'm like, yo, leave me out of this, okay? I'm doing good over here. Like, you volunteer someone else for this job. That's a rough job to get volunteered for. Verse 9, Satan responds, Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face." Satan's response is interesting. God says, hey, have you seen Job? The way I'm running the world, this dude is the best of the best. And Satan's response is, well, yeah, of course he is. You spoil him. You give him all that stuff. You protect him. Of course he loves you. Satan's argument here is that Job doesn't love and follow God because of who God is. He only does it for God's stuff. Job just wants your stuff. He doesn't actually want you. Take the stuff away and you'll see I'm right. Satan is challenging the way that God runs the world. Verse 12, very well, the Lord said to Satan, "Everything he owns is in your power." So as the kids of 2019 would say, God says bet, and they go for it. Or as those of us over 30, God just says, okay, deal. And God allows him to test this theory, which is crazy. Why would he do that? Then God goes, however, don't lay a hand on Job yourself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Here we get a glimpse of the fact that God is God and Satan is not. We have this wager, it seems like the very fabric of humanity is on the line, and like it's good versus evil, and it's this huge battle. But really, the truth is, they're not even remotely on the same level. Satan needs God's permission. He is clearly beneath God. He is limited by God, but God does give him room to operate and move and attack Job within God-given parameters. So no matter how the power Satan may seem to have, he is actually underneath the God of the universe in every way. So Satan leaves this heavenly place, this heavenly realm. We're brought back to the physical, and boom, 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 boom. We read and we learn that Job gets devastating news after devastating news. One servant, while he's still talking, tells him another that everything is lost. Everyone is lost. His kids are gone. His home is gone. Everything is destroyed. Wave after wave of the worst news imaginable, and seemingly out of nowhere and all at once. And how does Job respond? Job 1:20. Then Job stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshiped, saying, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Verse 22, throughout all of this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. Job's faith does not waver at all, which is unbelievable. It's unreal. What an insanely faith and trust-filled response to unbelievable devastation and suffering, to waves that are so much bigger than anything I have ever even remotely experienced in my life. God was spot on with the whole Job is the best of the best talk. It's almost like, as John mentioned, that God, when he volunteered Job, knew that he would pass this test. But then the story gets even crazier. We are transported back to this heavenly place, and the same thing is happening. The spiritual and unseen world, the same scene. The angels are presenting themselves to God. They're reporting to the creator of the universe, and Satan is there doing the same. And he steps forward. He and God talk. They have the same conversation, except when God brings up Job, he finishes with this. Verse 3, he still retains his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason. God basically looks at Satan and goes, hey, told you so. I'm right, you're wrong, I win, ding, 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 another one for the God of the universe. But Satan doesn't give up so easily. He says, verse 4, skin for skin, Satan answered the Lord. A man will give up everything he owns in exchange for his life. But stretch out your hand, strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. Satan's response is, his stuff is just stuff. If you let me actually mess with his health, if you let me really touch him and get to his physical person, then he'll cave. Which is an interesting take, okay? I get it. There are times in my life where things are stressful, there's a ton going on, and honestly, I'm kind of knocking it out of the park. You ever have those moments where you're like, look at me adulting really, really well right now. And I'm in those moments, and then I wake up one morning and my nose is running and I have a cough, and I'm like, everything is horrible and this world is gone. Like, take me to heaven, Lord. I don't want a runny nose. You know, colds are the worst. Satan is taking the approach that Job's personal health will finally push him over the ledge. He's arguing, you still bless him with health. He still only loves you for what you're giving him. And then God responds, chapter 2, verse 6, very well, the Lord said to Satan, he's in your power, only spare his life. Again, why? Like, why say yes to this? Why let Satan do this? Why? You already won the bet. Like, why would you opt into another bet? But God agrees. And again, I'm sure we notice, Satan is limited by God. God gives him parameters. And verse 7 says, so Satan left the Lord's presence, back to the physical world, and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. That sounds terrible. Way worse than any runny nose or cough, okay? The book of Job actually takes some time throughout all those chapters and describes a little bit more of what Job experienced physically. It talks about how his skin was covered with maggots. Job 7 says his skin formed crusts. I don't know about you, crusts are for bread and not for skin. That's disgusting. He's in horrible pain. His skin turns black and begins to fall off. And then there's a verse that says his breath was nasty. That just feels like kicking somebody when they're down, to be like, also your breath stinks, okay? To have a breath mint. That's terrible. And on top of all of this internal suffering and grief, he now has this horrendous external physical suffering. And Job 2:8 gives us this insane imagery of what Job is going through. It says, then Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself while he sat among the ashes. Job, after all of this, plops down. His life, everything had been destroyed. His health gone. He in massive emotional and physical pain, beyond confused as to what just happened and how quickly he lost everything. And he doesn't understand. For all he knew, the way he felt he's going to die at any moment, he probably hoped that he would, so that all of this would just stop. And he sat in the ashes in the wake of the destruction, where his home and his family and everything used to be. And he just scratches himself with part of his broken life. What a picture. And then his wife says, hey, he looks like he's doing good. I got some words for you. And his wife walks up and basically says, what are you doing? Curse God and die. Very encouraging. Good wife right there. And how does he respond? What does he do next? As he sits among the ashes of his once great life, he says, Job 2:10, should we accept only good from God and not adversity? Throughout all of this, Job did not sin in what he said. This is wild. And this is no simple Sunday school lesson for children. This is a rough and gritty story, a story of enormous loss and grief, and also a story of a heavenly wager, a heavenly bet that made it all happen. Last week, John talked about how there were two different worlds, right? Like we talked about the physical and the spiritual. And we get to see the spiritual and how it affected the physical life of Job here in this story. And the wager lifts this curtain between the two worlds, and we get a glimpse of the unseen. And can I be honest? I almost wish we didn't get a glimpse of it, because it's confusing. And it's difficult to understand, and it's weird. And honestly, I don't fully get why God would even opt into this wager, and I don't know that we ever will. Why would God do this? And this book is full of Job wondering the exact same thing. He didn't even get to see the behind the scenes like we do. He's just wondering, why? And why is an all-important question. We as human beings, we wonder why all the time. If you're my kids watching a movie that we just started, they ask why about 1,000 times, okay? But we wonder why about everything. And it's important that we wonder, right? Why did this happen? Why is this happening? Why like that? Why to me? Why to them? Why now? We are often desperate for explanation. And listen, explanations can help. Answering the question why can help. Explanations are a good thing. If we want to motivate people well, giving them a good reason why is super helpful. It's helpful to see the big picture. It's super helpful. And honestly, throughout the Bible, we get a ton of explanation, but not about everything. And sometimes I think when we wonder and when we are desperate for an explanation, it doesn't actually deliver the relief and the peace that we hoped it would. There are lots of things in my life that I am desperate for an explanation of. There are things in my life too where I got an explanation and it didn't actually help me. It did not resolve anything. I'm a guy who loves TVs and movies. I love to watch TV. I love movies. I have my whole life. And when I was in middle school, like almost nightly, and when I was in high school, all the way to when I was in college and I would come home from college for the weekends, I would go up to my parents' room and I would sit on the bed and I would watch TV with my mom. And we had a bunch of TVs. It started as I was a kid. I would lay across the bed and watch it. And we watched like NCIS all growing up. We watched House Hunters. HGTV was our jam, okay? We'd watch that couple looking for their second vacation home in the Bahamas. And when you meet the couple, the guy would be like, hey, I'm a coat check guy for a restaurant. My wife's a stay-at-home mom for our 2 dogs. Our budget for our second vacation home is $4.5 million. And you're like, I don't understand this at all. And then I'm like, they're definitely picking House 2. The closets are too small in House 1. Anyway, but my favorite show to watch with my mom that we watched weekly and I would like argue with people about, I was so into, is the show Lost. Anybody watch Lost back in the day? Yes, okay, don't clap for that show, okay. This is, anyway, okay, in case you don't know, Lost is a show about a plane crash of people who land on a deserted island, and everything seems weird, and you're wondering what's going on, and then things get crazier and crazier, and the plot just continues to thicken in ways you could never imagine, okay? We crash on this tropical island, all of a sudden you're like, what's a polar bear doing there? There's a polar bear there, we don't know why. At one point, there's a black cloud of mist that's floating around the island, and then that black cloud of mist becomes a person. I don't know why. At one point in time, this island is jumping through time. I don't know. At one point, it jumps sideways through time into like alternate realities. And can I tell you something? You're probably sitting there going, that sounds so stupid. I was hooked. I was hook, line, and sinker. I was like, where are they going to next? The cave people? Let's see it. Let's go. Like travel somewhere. I'm into this. And everything was, I was hooked. It was wild. It was unbelievable. And I was desperate. I was desperate for why. I was like, man, someday I can't wait to get the answers for this. I can't wait till this all ties together because I don't know how to polar bear and time traveling island tie together, but it's gonna be great. And I was so excited. I was like, this ending is going to be epic. It wasn't. It's terrible. Like, that never happens. There's nothing. I still don't know what that show was about. Like, apparently they're all dead or something, or this island is, I don't even know. Like, nothing made sense. The show ended. Oh, and I watched the ending. It's not that like, oh, they stopped running it. No, they finished it. They're like, this is how we want to end. I'm like, that's not how you should want to end a show. Terrible. And as I write this message, I'm realizing that I'm harboring some deep resentment to the writers of Lost. And I should probably talk to someone about that. But it gave me zero resolution. It did not make me feel better at all. And I don't know, I think sometimes when we get the answer that we are desperate for, we get the explanation we are desperate for, it doesn't actually help the way we thought it would. And yes, the creator God of the universe is very different than the horrible writers of Lost, okay? But I think there's correlation there, that sometimes a full explanation doesn't actually fix everything. It doesn't magically make the suffering okay. We seem to think knowing the why will make it better somehow. I mean, especially when it comes to our suffering and the difficulty in our lives. And there are lots of reasons of the why of suffering, okay? Sometimes it's our choices. Sometimes our suffering is self-inflicted. It is simply the consequences of our bad decisions, and we cause it ourselves. We know that's why we're suffering. Sometimes it's others' choices. Sometimes the people we love around us or the people who might be far from us make decisions that have consequences that we then suffer from. And there's a ripple effect from those. Sometimes suffering is just because we live in an evil and broken and fractured world. And sometimes maybe it's a heavenly wager that we do not know about, like Job. I don't know. All I know is for 30 chapters, Job and his friends argue about why he is suffering. Job and his friends were looking around them for an explanation. They did not and could not seem to understand why any of this was happening. So they looked and they searched anything and everything they could to attempt to get some kind of answer to the reason why. And often, as Job is responding to his friends, he's actually longing for a face-to-face with God. Job's friends would argue and Job would respond, and his friends would argue and he would respond. And often he's going, man, if I could just talk to God, if I could just hear him, if I could just see his face. He's longing for some kind of explanation because he is confused and he is hurt. And can I tell you, he's not wrong in wanting the reason why. He's not wrong in longing for an explanation. He's not wrong for wanting to look at God and go, give me the reason for this. But here's the thing. Job never quite gets that. God eventually shows up in chapter 38. The God of the universe comes down in a whirlwind, but Job doesn't quite get it. When God responds and the God of the universe shows up in a whirlwind, Job 38 verse 2, this is what he says to Job. Who is this who obscures my counsel with ignorant words? Get ready to answer me like a man when I question you. You will inform me. Where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have an understanding. Who fixed its dimensions? Certainly you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? What supports its foundations or laid its cornerstones? And then God keeps going with a lot more of that. God's response isn't super easy for us to grapple with either. God basically spends these chapters, like 3 or 4 chapters, asking Job, hey, do you really understand how the universe works? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the universe? Were you there? Have you walked the depths of the ocean like I have? Did you stretch out the clouds over the sky? Have you made the sun rise and the sun set? Can you speak and make it rain? Can you control the lightning? God doesn't come down and explain everything to Job. The truth is, God doesn't come down and explain anything to Job. He doesn't give him a why. And listen, I'm not Job. I don't exactly know how Job would have responded, but I'm not sure if God had come down in a whirlwind and said, hey man, I hear you're confused, you're wondering why. Truth is, Satan came in talking this trash. I was like, Job's really good. And Satan was like, let me mess him up. And he's like, yeah, go for it. Let's make a bet. That's why. I don't think Job would be like, oh, that's why? A bet's a bet, man. No worries. Like, it's cool. My kids are dead. That's cool. But why did he even make the bet? Why make that? This is difficult to grasp and understand. And I mean, if you're like me and you read these chapters, you're also wondering, why did God respond like that? Like, he's pretty snarky and pretty sassy there. I mean, Job's had a tough week, God. Maybe cut him a break, you know what I mean? Like, he lost a lot. This is rough. But here's the thing. God's response is actually loving. God doesn't come down and attempt to explain the plot of the universe and all of history to Job. Because I don't know if you know this or not. We, human beings, cannot fully understand that. We're here for just a moment on God's earth, okay? And trying to understand everything is like popping our head into a movie for 5 seconds and attempting to explain the plot. It's like watching 5 seconds of Lost. You know what? I'll give you a whole episode. Watch one whole episode of the series Lost and explain the plot to me. I watched every one. I still can't explain the plot. I'm really harboring some anger towards Lost. Sorry about that. So instead of God trying to explain something to Job that he will never understand, God just tells Job, don't look at all that. Don't worry about the inner workings of this complex universe. Look at me. Fix your eyes on me. Because if Job just continues to try to understand the why of everything, he's going to drown in it all. So God instead says, don't worry about that. I got it. Look to me, fix your eyes on me, trust me. I hold it all together in ways that you will never understand, and you don't have to understand because I've got it, and I'm with you in it. We learn very quickly in the story of Job that God listened to Job the whole time. God was close through all of Job's story, and as we read the Bible, we learn that this God of the universe is close in our story too. Because listen, when we read the Bible and we look at the big story of the Bible, when we understand the good news that is the gospel, we learn that the message of the gospel isn't we won't suffer. It's not that life won't be messy. It's that we get God in the mess, and that's enough. This is why, as I read and I reread Job, I came to the conclusion that knowing the why won't always help like we think it will. Now, please don't get confused. Not knowing the why in suffering doesn't mean that our suffering is pointless, even if we never know the why. even if in our struggle, in our suffering, if it's never explained to us, that doesn't mean there isn't a purpose. Our suffering isn't meaningless. Our suffering isn't random. God is working in the good and the bad and the ugly to ultimately bring glory to himself, to grow and to shape you and I, and to restore the world back to how he meant it to be someday, how he wants it to be. Nothing in our life, the good, the bad, or the ugly, is wasted. God is at work in all of it. But here's what I do mean. If Job was able to see this heavenly wager, if God had lifted the curtain for Job like he did for us, I don't think it would have helped. I mean, Job suffered worse than anyone I can think of. I don't know exactly what you're going through or what you're suffering, and I don't mean to diminish it, but I mean, Job had it rough, and naturally, he was desperate for an explanation, and he wasn't wrong for wanting one, but God simply shows Job that sometimes we just won't understand. Sometimes we just won't get it, but we get God. The Bible is gritty and messy and doesn't always have easy answers to these problems. It's not fairy tales and kid stories. There's death and destruction and disease and perversion all over the place. And the story of the Bible is not that there won't be a mess, but that God will be with us in the mess. For instance, I don't think the point of Job is that if we have faith in God through our suffering, he'll double the blessings in our life. I think it's that we do not and we will not understand how this holy, almighty, all-powerful God runs the universe. We cannot understand it. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And that is a good thing. Listen, I don't want to be the one who runs the universe. I just don't. And to be honest with you, no offense, I really don't want you to be the one who runs the universe. We are terrible at being in charge. Sin entered this world because a couple of human beings thought they knew better than God. And we have been, as human beings, have been challenging God in his way ever since. But the truth is, if God decided to come down in a whirlwind today, like he did for Job, to any of us, I think our response might be the same as Job's. Job chapter 40, verse 4, he says, I am so insignificant. How can I answer you? I place my hand over my mouth. Job understands very quickly that I am way out of my league here. I don't actually know anything. And this is the God of the universe. And when we get to an understanding that's somewhat similar to Job's, that I may not actually know what's best, that I'm actually not in charge, and that that's actually a good thing, that's the place where we really let go, where we find trust and we have faith and we find peace. God shows Job and shows us that this universe, things are infinitely more complex than we could ever imagine. But God is far more powerful and far more good and far more loving than we could ever imagine. He is deserving of our trust. And Job's response is to immediately go, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to just trust you. He doesn't need an explanation. He just needs God. Job 42:5, when God finishes his chapters of challenging Job, this is how Job responds. I had heard reports about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job says, I have seen who you are, and you, God, are enough. That's all Job needed. That's all Job got, really. Job lost everything and everyone, but got God, and that was enough. He didn't need all the answers. He didn't need all the details. And we, as a people today in 2024, get so much more of the plot and the story and the picture than Job did. We get to see so much more of God. We get the whole Bible, okay? We get the Old Testament where we get to see how God worked and cared and led Israel. We get to see Jesus. We get to hear and read the promises of the Savior of the world. We get to see how the Son of God gave his life on a cross for us. We get to see him rise in victory over sin and death. And afterwards, we get to see God move through the church and rescue people after people after people. And we can look at our own lives behind us and right now, and we can find evidence for God and what he has done and who he is. We get so much more of the story. We get to see how God treats people and how he's treated us. Yet, we still don't have a big enough view to understand it all. But even though we don't understand it all, God deserves our trust. And the God of the universe doesn't owe us an explanation. We may not understand it all. We may not know all the whys. We may not get an explanation. But we can trust in this God of the universe. We can, like Job, see who God really is, and we can, like Job, look up and fix our eyes on him. We can look to God and not at everything around us for answers. We can look at the Creator who set the foundations of the world, the one who sits on the throne in heavenly places. And we can know that he loves us because we can look at the cross, the evidence for that, the ultimate demonstration of his deep love and affection for you and me. The ultimate proof that God moves toward us in our suffering and in our mess. And no matter how much there may be something in our life that we just do not understand, we can look to him and have peace that no matter my circumstances, he doesn't change. He is still good. He is still kind. He is still gracious, compassionate, loving, merciful. He is still close, and he is up to something. He is at work. We just have to keep our eyes on him. The writer of Hebrews had this to say about how Moses made it through his suffering. In Hebrews 11, he said, "For Moses persevered as one who sees him who is invisible." He said a chapter later that we run and we persevere. While we do that, we fix our eyes on Jesus. David wrote psalm after psalm about looking up, looking to the hills, looking to the heavens to God for strength and for help and for refuge. Moses and Job and David and all of us may not fully understand, but we can look to the one who does, to the one who holds it all together. Last week, John ended by asking us, can we trust God no matter how things appear at the time? And this week, I think we have to ask ourselves, can I trust God even if I don't understand the why? Even if I never know the why? Can I understand that while it does not make sense to me, and it may never make sense to me on this side of heaven before I stand before God, I can have faith that God is who he says he is and he will do what he says he will do? Can I trust that while I might never get an explanation, I still know that he is good and compassionate and loving and kind and gracious and more? And honestly, maybe like I did with Job, can we ask and say, hey, maybe not knowing the why will actually help call me to a deeper level of trust in the one who deserves it? And then the next question I think we need to ask is, can I look up and not around? Can I stop desperately looking around me for answers to understand and instead look up to the one who is in control? Look up to the one who holds all the answers. And as we finish this morning and we get ready to worship and we get ready to go on with our day, there's a few different ways that I think that you can respond and we can respond this morning as a people. You can start by just having a moment with God, just you and him. I think sometimes we just need to talk to God, but we're too scared. We try to dress it up or change it. And can I tell you something? You don't need to dress it up. You don't need to change yourself before you walk before the creator of the universe. He loves you just as you are. He wants to hear from you just the way you are. You don't have to speak in King James language. You can just tell him, God, I really, really hate this thing and it stinks and I do not get it. And if your prayer is just help me, that's a great prayer. And you should sit there and pray that this morning. You can respond with communion this morning. There's cups in the back of the seats in front of you. You can take some time to remember and remind yourself not just who God is, but what he did for you and I that showed us who he is. We're going to worship here in a minute and respond like Job did. But also, like last week, I'm going to pray here in a minute, and we're going to have some really incredible people come and stand at the front. And if you're out there and you're like, man, I'm praying to God myself, but I would love to have someone who loves Jesus and loves me pray with me and help me and just like stand next to me as I struggle through this thing and wonder why. They would love to do that with you. And we're going to take some moments, and these are some amazing people. I know them, and they are ready and they are willing to pray with you. And I know it's kind of scary. You got to stand up and walk forward. But I think truly there's something when we physically take a step, there's something where our heart begins to follow that. And I think it's just like the church. It's the reason we are here, to let other people who love Jesus and love you into your life. And yeah, like John said last week, you're not coming up here for counseling. You're just going to come up, maybe say one sentence, and then just pray with them. Maybe pray for peace without an explanation. Or maybe pray that we fix our eyes on the invisible and not the explainable. Because that's what the church is about. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to take a moment to respond just like that. Let's pray. God, you are incredible, almighty, all-powerful, creator of the universe, sustainer of the universe. Lord, you hold it all together. And I pray that this morning, as we struggle and we wrestle with the difficulties and suffering of the life here on earth, and as we wonder why, and we are desperate for an explanation, Lord, I pray that we can be reminded this morning that even if we don't get it, it's in your hands. And we can be reminded that as much as we are struggling, as difficult as this may be, Lord, you are not far from us. You are close to us. You are with us in the mess. And Lord, I pray this morning that whether we are in the suffering now or we're just coming out of some suffering or we're about to enter into a season of life that we may not see coming, I pray that you are at work in our heart, that you help us to trust you even without an explanation because you deserve it. And God, I pray that you help us to, in the midst of this suffering and difficulty, that we can look up and fix our eyes on you because you are the one who holds it all together, and you are good and you love and you care for us. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.